It all began on a quiet Tuesday morning, one of those days where the air feels heavy with the promise of change. Emma Johnson, a kind-hearted, resolute woman in her early 40s, boarded the Route 12 city bus like she always did. It was part of her daily routine, riding to work as a school secretary, where she helped children navigate their own small challenges. Little did she know, this ride would not only test her strength, but also spark a movement in her community. The bus was crowded, as usual, passengers crammed shoulder to shoulder, clutching bags and briefcases. Emma spotted an open seat near the front. She settled in, weary from a restless night. But just as the engine groaned to life and the bus lurched forward, a voice cut through the hum of morning chatter. "You can't sit there," barked the driver, John Simmons. He was a man whose gruff demeanor and rigid rules had earned him a notorious reputation among regular riders. At first, Emma thought she'd misheard. The seat wasn't reserved. It wasn't marked in any way that suggested she couldn't sit there. "Excuse me?" she replied, her voice calm but firm. Simmons, a tall, heavy-set man with a badge of authority he wore like a shield, repeated himself, louder this time. "You need to move to the back. Now." Emma felt the eyes of the other passengers turn toward her. Some looked down at their laps, unwilling to get involved, while a few exchanged uneasy glances. "There's no reason for me to move," Emma said. Her tone was steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. The driver, now visibly irritated, stepped out of his seat and pointed toward the rear of the bus. "Do I need to make myself clearer?" he snarled. What happened next could have faded into obscurity. A small injustice, one of countless others that Emma might have quietly endured. But that wasn't her way. She stayed put, her spine straight, her resolve unshaken. The tension was palpable. Simmons leaned closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Don't make this difficult." Before Emma could respond, a woman in the back stood up. Sophia Brown, a young teacher with a fiery spirit, pulled out her phone and started recording. "You can't do this," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the tension. "She has every right to sit there." Simmons turned to her, his face flushed with anger. "Mind your business," he shouted, but Sophia didn't flinch. The camera was rolling, capturing every word, every glare, every gesture. The standoff escalated. Simmons grabbed the radio, calling for backup, while Emma sat frozen in place, 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. She wasn't just fighting for her seat, she was fighting for her dignity, her right to exist without fear of being silenced or shoved aside. The bus came to an abrupt halt at the next stop, and the scene spilled out onto the street. Passengers disembarked, some murmuring in frustration, others pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. Within hours, the video was online. It spread like wildfire, sparking a wave of outrage. Social media lit up with hashtags, debates, and calls for action. News outlets picked up the story, replaying the footage of Simmons towering over Emma, his face contorted with anger. People from all walks of life weighed in, some condemning the driver, others questioning why Emma hadn't simply complied. But one thing was clear, the incident had struck a nerve. Emma could have stayed quiet after that day. She could have let the world move on, allowed the outrage to die down, and returned to her life in relative anonymity. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger, a system that allowed people like Simmons to wield power unchecked, that forced people like Emma to constantly prove their worth, their humanity. And so, with the support of her community and the fearless Olivia Carter by her side, she decided to take a stand. What happens when one woman's quiet act of defiance becomes a rallying cry for justice? Stay with us, because the road ahead is full of twists and turns. You'll see how Emma, with her unshakable resolve, takes on a system designed to break her spirit, and how her bravery ignites a fire that can't be extinguished. The next chapter is where the real fight begins. Don't go anywhere. The video of the incident spread faster than Emma could have ever imagined. By the end of the day, millions had watched the clip, shared by countless social media accounts, with captions ranging from outrage to rallying cries for justice. Emma's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from friends, family, and even strangers. Her name became a symbol overnight. Some hailed her as a hero, while others hurled cruel accusations, questioning her motives and her right to stand her ground. But for Emma, it wasn't about fame or public opinion. It was about what was right. The night after the incident, she sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she scrolled through the endless stream of comments. Among the noise, one message stood out. It was from Olivia Carter, a well-known civil rights attorney whose reputation for taking on seemingly impossible cases had earned her respect nationwide. Olivia's message was simple. If you're ready to fight this, I'll stand with you. Emma hesitated. She wasn't a confrontational person by nature. Life had taught her the value of choosing battles wisely, of knowing when to speak up and when to let things go. But this time felt different. This time, staying silent felt like surrendering to something far bigger than one man's abuse of power. After a sleepless night, she called Olivia. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of what lay ahead. The next morning, Emma met Olivia in her bustling downtown office. Olivia was as sharp and confident as Emma had imagined. Her presence filled the room, not with intimidation, but with a sense of assurance that Emma desperately needed. Together, they began to lay the groundwork for what would become a case that would challenge not only Simmons, but the entire transportation authority. First, they had to build a narrative. Olivia knew that cases like this weren't just about facts, they were about the story behind the facts. And Emma's story was one of resilience. "This isn't just about what happened on that bus," Olivia explained. "It's about every time you, and people like you, have been made to feel less than. It's about drawing a line in the sand and saying, no more." As the days turned into weeks, Emma found herself swept into a whirlwind of preparation. Olivia's team worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, reviewing legal precedents, and speaking to witnesses. Sophia Brown, the woman who had recorded the video, became a key ally. She testified about Simmons's actions that day and shared additional stories she'd heard from other passengers about his behavior. The public's reaction to the case was mixed. On one hand, there was overwhelming support. Protesters gathered outside the Transportation Authority's headquarters, demanding Simmons be fired and broader reforms implemented. But the backlash was just as fierce. Critics accused Emma of overreacting, of seeking attention, of trying to profit off a minor inconvenience. The comments stung, but Emma refused to let them deter her. She reminded herself that this fight wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. Simmons, meanwhile, doubled down on his defense. His legal team released statements claiming he had acted within protocol, citing vague rules about maintaining order on crowded buses. But Olivia wasn't deterred. She dug deeper, uncovering a pattern of complaints against Simmons that painted a damning picture. The pressure began to mount on the Transportation Authority. They had initially tried to downplay the incident, hoping it would blow over. But as public scrutiny intensified, they were forced to take action. Simmons was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. For Emma, it was a small victory, but she knew the real battle was still to come. The night before the trial, Emma sat alone in her living room, reflecting on how much her life had changed in such a short time. She felt a mix of anxiety and determination. She thought about her parents, who had taught her to stand tall even in the face of adversity. She thought about the countless faces she had seen in the protests, people who believed in her, who saw her as a beacon of hope. And most of all, she thought about her own resolve. This wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for her dignity. The next day, as she walked into the courthouse, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her. But she didn't walk alone. Olivia was by her side, and so were dozens of supporters, holding signs and chanting her name. Emma took a deep breath, her heart pounding as she stepped into the courtroom. She was ready. What happens when a single act of courage meets a wall of systemic resistance? That's the question we'll explore in the next chapter. Stay with us, because the trial is where the stakes get higher, the arguments sharper, and the truth begins to unravel. You won't want to miss it. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters lined the gallery, their notepads and cameras poised to capture every moment of the trial. The case had grown far beyond Emma's personal fight. It was now a symbol of something much larger. Justice for the everyday person who dared to stand up against abuse of power. Emma sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly together. She glanced at Olivia, who was reviewing her notes with calm precision. "We've got this," Olivia whispered, offering a reassuring nod. The opening statement set the tone for what would be a contentious trial. Olivia rose first, her voice firm and commanding as she addressed the jury. "This case isn't just about a seat on a bus," she began. "It's about the fundamental right to dignity. It's about holding accountable those who abuse their authority, and ensuring that no one, no matter their status, has to endure humiliation and injustice. She spoke of Emma's courage and the broader implications of the case, painting a vivid picture of why this fight mattered. When Simmons' lawyer took the floor, the strategy was clear: deflect and diminish. They framed Simmons as a man simply doing his job, enforcing protocols to maintain order. They portrayed Emma as defiant and disruptive, someone who had escalated the situation unnecessarily. It was a calculated attempt to shift blame, to sow doubt in the minds of the jurors. The first witnesses were called, and the courtroom braced for a storm of conflicting testimonies. Olivia started strong, bringing Sophia Brown to the stand. Sophia recounted the events with unwavering clarity, her voice steady as she described Simmons's aggressive behavior and Emma's composed response. When Olivia presented the video as evidence, the jury watched intently, their expressions revealing shock and discomfort. The footage was damning, a clear visual record of Simmons's hostility and Emma's quiet resistance. But the defense wasn't going down without a fight. They cross-examined Sophia, attempting to undermine her credibility. They questioned her motives for recording the incident, implying that she sought fame or attention. Sophia didn't waver. "I recorded it because it was wrong," she said firmly. Someone had to speak up. Next, Emma took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she began to tell her story. She spoke not just of the incident on the bus, but of a lifetime of experiences that had shaped her resolve. She described the small but persistent indignities she had faced, moments that many would dismiss as insignificant, but that over time had become a heavy burden to bear. "I didn't sit there to make a statement," Emma explained, her voice trembling with emotion. "I sat there because I was tired, not just physically, but tired of feeling like I had to shrink myself to make others comfortable. When he told me to move, it wasn't just about that seat. It was about everything I've ever been told I couldn't have or couldn't be." The defense tried to rattle her, pressing her with pointed questions, but Emma remained composed, her answers thoughtful and deliberate. Her testimony was a turning point, a moment when the jury saw not just a plaintiff, but a person, real, vulnerable, and undeniably strong. As the trial progressed, Olivia introduced a series of additional witnesses and documents that painted a clear picture of Simmons' troubling history. Former passengers testified about his repeated outbursts and discriminatory behavior. Internal reports revealed that complaints had been filed against him before, but were brushed aside by the Transportation Authority. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a symptom of a larger problem within the system. The defense scrambled to contain the damage. They called Simmons to the stand, where he attempted to justify his actions. He claimed that Emma's refusal to move was a safety concern, that he had been following protocol to prevent disorder on the bus. But under cross-examination, Olivia dismantled his arguments piece by piece. She highlighted inconsistencies in his testimony and pointed to the Transportation Authority's vague and outdated policies, which had allowed such abuses to persist unchecked. By the time closing arguments began, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Olivia delivered a final, impassioned plea to the jury. "Emma Johnson's courage has brought us here today, but this case is about all of us," she said. "It's about the kind of world we want to live in. Do we stand by and let injustice go unchallenged? Or do we take a stand and demand better, for ourselves, for our children, and for our communities?" The defense attempted to counter with a plea for leniency, arguing that Simmons's actions, while regrettable, didn't warrant the level of scrutiny and punishment being sought. They painted him as a scapegoat, a victim of public outrage. But the damage had been done. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury's deliberation was swift. When the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted. Simmons was found guilty of assault and misconduct, and the Transportation Authority was held liable for its negligence in addressing his behavior. Emma's victory was not just personal. It was a resounding statement that injustice, no matter how entrenched, could be confronted and overcome. But this was only the beginning. The fight didn't end with the verdict. What changes would come from this landmark case? And how would Emma's courage inspire others to challenge the injustices in their own lives? Stay with us, because in the next chapter, we'll explore the ripple effects of Emma's stand, how one moment of defiance became a catalyst for systemic reform and community empowerment. You won't want to miss it. The courtroom's applause echoed in Emma's ears long after the trial ended. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the victory. the relief, the vindication, and the joy of knowing that justice had been served. But as the reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, microphones thrust toward her and Olivia, Emma realized that the fight wasn't truly over. The verdict was a crucial step, but the work to create lasting change had only just begun. The days following the trial were a whirlwind. Emma's face was on every news outlet, her story shared across every major social media platform. She became a symbol of courage, a name synonymous with standing against oppression. But Emma wasn't interested in fame. When asked how she felt about her newfound notoriety, her answer was always the same. This isn't about me. It's about what comes next. The Transportation Authority, under immense public pressure, announced a series of reforms in the wake of the trial. Among the changes was a new anti-bias training program for all employees, focusing on de-escalation techniques and respectful communication. A civilian oversight committee was established to handle complaints, ensuring that grievances would no longer be swept under the rug. These changes didn't happen overnight, nor were they without resistance. Many within the system viewed the reforms as unnecessary or overly punitive. But Emma's victory made it impossible to ignore the cracks that had long existed within the foundation. Beyond the institutional changes, something even more profound began to happen within the community. People who had remained silent for years started to find their voices. Inspired by Emma's courage, passengers and employees alike began sharing their own stories of discrimination and abuse. Town halls and community forums sprang up, creating spaces for open dialogue about systemic issues that had festered for too long. Emma became a regular speaker at these events, though she often downplayed her role in the movement. "I'm not a hero," she would say. "I'm just someone who is tired of staying quiet. But this fight belongs to all of us." Her humility only endeared her further to those who looked to her for inspiration. One particularly memorable moment came at a local high school, where Emma was invited to speak to a group of students. She told them about the incident on the bus, but more importantly, she shared what it had taught her about resilience. "Courage isn't about being fearless," she explained. "It's about being scared and choosing to act anyway. Change doesn't happen because one person decides to stand up. It happens when all of us decide that enough is enough." The students listened with rapt attention, their faces reflecting a mixture of admiration and determination. After her speech, a young girl approached Emma, her eyes brimming with tears. "My mom always tells me to keep my head down," the girl said, her voice trembling. "But you make me want to stand tall." Emma hugged her, feeling the weight of the moment, a reminder of why she had chosen to fight in the first place. Not everyone welcomed the changes or the attention the case had brought to the city. There were detractors who saw the reforms as unnecessary or an overreach. Simmons's supporters, though fewer in number, were vocal in their opposition, accusing Emma of ruining a man's career over a misunderstanding. The backlash was painful, but Emma met it with grace. "Change is hard," she often said, "but just because it's hard doesn't mean it isn't worth it." As the months passed, the effects of Emma's stand rippled outward, reaching beyond the confines of her city. Advocacy groups across the country used her case as an example in their own fights for justice. Olivia Carter, too, found her work expanding as more people sought her out, inspired by the results she had achieved with Emma. Together, they started a foundation dedicated to empowering individuals to challenge injustice in their own lives. The foundation provided legal support, education, and resources, ensuring that Emma's story wouldn't be the last of its kind. For Emma, the journey was transformative. She had always thought of herself as an ordinary person, someone content to live quietly and do her part in small ways. But the events of the past year had shown her that even ordinary people could make an extraordinary impact. She had stood against a system designed to silence her, and in doing so, she had amplified the voices of countless others. Yet, even as the movement grew, Emma remained grounded. She still worked at the school, still rode the bus, though Simmons was no longer behind the wheel. Every so often, someone would recognize her and thank her for what she'd done. She would smile and nod, always redirecting the conversation to the importance of collective action. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Emma thought about the road ahead. The changes she had helped spark were just the beginning. There were still battles to fight, injustices to confront, and systems to reform. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. What comes next when a movement takes root? In the next chapter, we'll delve into how Emma's foundation grows, the challenges they face, and the victories they achieve. You'll see how one woman's courage continues to inspire change, proving that even the smallest acts of defiance can ripple into something much greater. Stick with us, because the story isn't over yet. The next chapter is about building a future where justice and equality are no longer aspirations but realities. Months turned into years, but the fire sparked by Emma Johnson's stand never dimmed. In fact, it burned brighter, fueled by the work of the foundation she and Olivia Carter had created. The Stand Tall initiative, named after Emma's steadfast refusal to bow to injustice, became a beacon of hope for those who felt silenced by systems of power. The foundation started small, operating out of a modest office with just a handful of volunteers. At its core was a mission to provide legal aid, education, and resources to individuals facing discrimination or abuse of authority. But as Emma quickly learned, the work wasn't just about addressing individual cases. It was about changing the culture that allowed these injustices to thrive in the first place. The first major initiative was a partnership with local schools and community centers to implement anti-discrimination workshops. Emma believed that lasting change began with education. These workshops, led by a diverse team of educators and advocates, tackled topics like implicit bias, systemic racism, and the importance of allyship. At each session, Emma shared her story, not as a victim, but as an example of how courage could challenge the status quo. The workshops weren't always easy. In some communities, the resistance was palpable. People questioned why these conversations were necessary, accusing the initiative of stirring up division. Emma approached these moments with the same quiet strength that had defined her on that fateful day on the bus. "This isn't about blame," she would say. "It's about understanding, about building a world where everyone feels seen and valued." Beyond education, the foundation expanded its legal efforts, taking on cases that echoed Emma's own experience. One such case involved a young man named Marcus, who had been wrongfully detained by a transit officer while on his way to a job interview. The parallels to Emma's story were undeniable: an abuse of power, a vulnerable individual, and a system reluctant to hold itself accountable. With the foundation's support, Marcus not only won his case but also helped expose broader issues within the transit authority's policing practices. Each victory brought new attention to the Stand Tall initiative, attracting donors, volunteers, and allies from across the country. The foundation's reach grew, with branches opening in neighboring cities and eventually spreading nationwide. But with growth came new challenges. The work was relentless, the opposition fierce. Critics accused the initiative of being too radical, too disruptive. Some labeled it a nuisance, others a threat. Emma met these challenges head-on. She refused to let the criticism derail the mission. "Progress isn't comfortable," she often reminded her team. "But if we stop every time someone pushes back, nothing will ever change." One of the most significant turning points came 3 years after the trial, when the foundation partnered with a coalition of advocacy groups to push for legislative reforms at the state level. They proposed a sweeping bill aimed at addressing systemic bias within public institutions, from transit authorities to law enforcement. The bill, called the Justice in Action Act, included measures for mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight committees, and protections for whistleblowers. The campaign to pass the bill was grueling. Emma and Olivia spent countless hours lobbying lawmakers, organizing rallies, and rallying public support. The opposition was formidable, with well-funded interest groups working tirelessly to block the legislation. But Emma's story remained a powerful tool. She traveled across the state, speaking to packed auditoriums, town halls, and even the state capitol. Her message was simple: this isn't about politics. It's about people. It's about doing what's right. The night the bill passed was one of the most emotional moments of Emma's life. She stood on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by supporters, as the final votes were counted. When the announcement came, cheers erupted, and Emma felt a wave of relief and pride. The victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who had fought alongside her, everyone who had refused to accept injustice as inevitable. But for Emma, the work was never about the accolades or the headlines. It was about the quiet, often invisible changes that rippled out from each victory. It was about the child who no longer feared walking into a classroom where they might be treated differently. It was about the bus passenger who felt safe standing their ground. It was about the countless lives touched by the Stand Tall initiative, each one a testament to the power of collective action. As the years went by, Emma became a living legend. Her name was spoken in classrooms, her story taught as part of history curriculums, but Emma remained humble, always redirecting the spotlight to the movement she had helped build. "This isn't about one person," she would say. "It's about all of us, working together to make things better." In her later years, Emma began to step back from the day-to-day operations of the foundation, passing the torch to a new generation of leaders. She remained a guiding presence, offering wisdom and support when needed. On her 65th birthday, the foundation hosted a celebration in her honor, drawing hundreds of supporters from across the country. As Emma looked out at the crowd, she was overwhelmed by the realization of just how far they had come. In her speech that night, Emma reflected on the journey. "When I sat on that bus all those years ago, I never imagined it would lead to this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that even the smallest acts of courage can grow into something extraordinary. And that's because of all of you. Because you believed, because you acted, because you cared." As the crowd erupted into applause, Emma smiled, knowing that the legacy of the Stand Tall initiative would endure long after she was gone. The movement was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had been inspired by her story, everyone who had decided to stand tall in their own lives. And as the celebration continued into the night, Emma quietly stepped away, watching from the sidelines with a sense of profound fulfillment. The fight for justice was far from over, but she knew it was in good hands. And that, dear viewers, is the true power of courage and resilience. It doesn't just change one person's life, it changes the world. But what's next for the Stand Tall initiative? And how can you carry Emma's legacy forward in your own life? Don't miss the next chapter, where we'll explore how you can take the lessons of this story and apply them to create change in your community. You won't want to miss it. Emma Johnson's journey teaches us something profound. The power to create change doesn't belong to the powerful alone. It lies in the hands of ordinary people, those who choose to act, to speak, to stand tall, even when the odds seem stacked against them. Her story isn't just an inspiring chapter in history, it's a call to action for all of us. The Stand Tall initiative may have started with one woman's defiance, but it became a movement because people believed in it. Now, as we explore the legacy Emma left behind, it's time to ask ourselves, how can we continue her work? How can we ensure that her stand was the beginning of something lasting, something that grows with each passing generation? The first step is understanding the importance of everyday courage. Emma's story wasn't about a grand, premeditated act. It was about a moment, one choice to resist when resistance felt impossible. That kind of courage exists within all of us. You don't need to lead a movement or win a landmark case to make a difference. Change begins with small actions. Challenging a harmful comment, standing up for someone being mistreated, or simply refusing to look the other way when you see injustice. But courage alone isn't enough. Change requires strategy, collaboration, and persistence. Emma's success came not just from her bravery, but from the community that rallied around her. That's why building connections is crucial. Whether it's joining an organization, volunteering for a cause, or simply engaging in meaningful conversations with friends and neighbors, the power of collective action cannot be overstated. Education is another cornerstone of change. Emma's foundation made education a central part of its mission because ignorance often fuels injustice. By learning about systemic issues, whether it's racism, bias, or abuse of power, you arm yourself with the tools to challenge them effectively. And education isn't just about learning, it's about teaching others. Share what you know. Speak up in spaces where silence perpetuates harm. Be the ripple that spreads awareness in your own circle. For those who feel called to action but don't know where to start, here are some tangible steps. Get involved. Locally, look for organizations in your community that align with your values. Whether it's a civil rights group, a neighborhood association, or a youth mentorship program, every effort contributes to the larger fight for justice. Advocate for policy change. Emma's story highlighted the importance of addressing systemic issues through legislation. Research local policies that need reform and support initiatives working toward that goal. Write to your representatives, attend town hall meetings, and make your voice heard. Support those on the front lines. Not everyone can lead the charge, but everyone can play a role. Donate to causes you believe in. Amplify voices that need to be heard, and offer your skills, whether it's writing, organizing, or simply showing up. Foster inclusive spaces in your workplace, school, or community. Work to create environments where everyone feels valued and respected. Advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in every aspect of your life. Don't underestimate your influence. Remember, Emma started with a single act of defiance. You never know how your actions might inspire others. Be consistent in your efforts, even when the results aren't immediate. As we reflect on Emma's story, it's also important to acknowledge that change isn't linear. There will be setbacks, resistance, and moments when the progress feels too slow. But as Emma taught us, persistence is key. Each small victory builds towards something greater. And even in the face of failure, the effort itself is a step forward. Imagine a world where everyone took even one small step toward justice, where the courage to stand tall was the rule, not the exception. That's the world Emma fought for, and it's a world we can build together. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's worth every ounce of effort. So, what will your contribution be? How will you take Emma's story and turn it into action in your own life? Perhaps it starts with something simple, a conversation, a donation, a decision to intervene when it matters most. Whatever it is, don't underestimate its power. Every movement begins with a single spark. If Emma's journey has touched you, let it inspire you to be that spark. And if you're unsure where to start, remember that you're not alone. The Stand Tall initiative is just one example of how people can come together to create something extraordinary. Find your own community, your own cause, and your own way to make a difference. Before we go, let me leave you with this. Emma's stand wasn't just about defiance. It was about hope. Hope that things can change. Hope that we can be better. And hope that, together, we can build a world where justice isn't a fight, but a given. Now, if Emma's story moved you, consider taking one simple action. Subscribe to this channel. Here we share stories of courage, resilience, and transformation. Stories that remind us of our shared humanity and our collective power to create change. By subscribing, you join a community of people committed to standing tall in their own lives. And don't stop here. Explore our other videos, where we dive into the lives of everyday heroes and the movements they've inspired. Let these stories fuel your own journey, because the fight for justice is far from over, and it's a fight we can only win together. So, what's next for you? The choice is yours. Stand tall, make a difference, and remember, the world changes when we do.